Happy Tuesday. All right, let's see if we can pull this up in the Facebook group. Otherwise, I do not see all of your comments when we're chatting. So while I'm pulling this up in the group, say hi to me. Let me know if you're jumping on now, if you're jumping on in the replay. How was your weekend? Did you have a good holiday weekend if you are in the US and celebrate? I don't know if you're like me as an entrepreneur, I always forget regular holidays until like the weekend before. So Friday, I was looking at my calendar for Monday. I was like, why do I only have two client calls? I could not figure out. And I was like, oh, right, because it's Labor Day. So hope for those of you who honored and celebrated that day, you had a lovely day off. And let me know what you did if you're getting back into it. Why do I not see myself? Oh, okay. I see myself live. So we are live. We have got a fun and good conversation today. So before we dig into all the good stuff, let's talk about giveaways. I'd love to give you all something for joining live, joining the conversation. Obviously, I love that you watch the replay as well, but we like to give away something to those of you who come on and hang with me because I know you could be in a million different places. I also selfishly really love when some of you are here to have a conversation. I think it makes it so much more enjoyable for me, obviously, but also I think more beneficial for everyone because get to hear what your questions are as it relates to the topic. So today, if you leave a comment, if you're live, drop an emoji, say hi, anything like that, and you will be entered to win a copy of my 6-week self-study sales course, Sell Out Without Feeling Like a Sellout. It walks you through both the clarity and mindset and the strategy and action of creating a full sales process. I think it's really darn good. It has helped people to literally get sold out in their business. So you get that for free. If you drop me an emoji, we'll pick one winner and we will DM you. Usually we remember to leave a comment here as well. All right, so let's see, what are we talking about today? We're talking about how to speed up success and have a 90% closing sales rate and how to have 100K launches or 100K years and the sales approach no one wants to lean into that really, really will exponentially blow up your business. So I'm going to give a little preface here. I'm going to tease this out a little bit because no one wants to talk about this. So if I don't tease it out, everyone's going to be like, oh, yawn, really? But I think this is a conversation that is so important, and it's something I talk about with my clients quite a bit. I'm going to share a challenge I give to a lot of my clients. I'll also share some of my own experience around this and how I specifically see this play out in sales and really support you in your business and support those results. But the example I shared, and I think this is just helpful context, I shared if you're on my email list, in the email we sent for this when I was still acting in LA, doing my acting thing. For those of you who don't know, I spent 10 years there. And I'm almost on my 10-year anniversary in New York City, which is crazy. I've been in business for 7.5 years, coaching for about 9 years because I started my business a little after I finished a year-long coach training program, and almost in New York for 10 years. We're gonna have to do some sort of fun celebration in the group for that. That's a whole different segue. Anyway, when I was in my acting days, when I was in LA, I both did, hey, whoever just joined live. When I did both film, kind of television stuff, and commercials. And I went through a series when I had just booked a really great commercial, and preceding that really great commercial that I booked, I got rejected 12 times in a row for various parts, commercial parts, and rejected in the way where I was put on what they call put on hold. And when you're put on hold, this is more information that you need, but I think it helps for context here. When you audition for a commercial, when you're put on hold, what this means is they're literally saying you're not fully booked yet, but it's usually between you and someone else. We want you to secure the date, hold the date. We want to know you're available because things move really quickly, that you're available for the full shoot date. We'll make that final selection, and then you'll book the part. So I didn't just get rejected. I got put on hold 12 times in a row, meaning it was like me and one other person. In fact, one time I lost the part it was a Doritos ice skating commercial. I still remember this. And it went to a 12-year-old. And I was probably 26 at the time. So, they wanted a 12-year-old. So a lot of times what happens when you're put on hold and it goes to someone else, it's not because you're not good enough. If anything, it's because you are good enough. It's you and someone else. It's not because you suck. It's not because you didn't do a great job. It's not because they're not considering you. You're getting literally rejected for the part because you are being considered for the part because it's you and someone else. And it usually comes down to who better matches the brief, who better matches what the commercial is going for, who better matches, if you're playing a daughter, the mother that got cast, right? Like there's all of these variables, and that will end up usually determining some of those factors. So, hey, Laura, I just, hey, happy anniversary, happy to get you luck. Thank you. 25th of this month is my New York anniversary, which is crazy, 10 years. I can officially call myself a New Yorker. They say after 10 years, you're a New Yorker, so I'm officially a New Yorker then. Anyway, I digress. Very, very nice to see you here. So I got rejected 12 times. And then the 13th commercial that I auditioned for, and this wasn't like I had a bunch of auditions in between. I was like on a streak where I was auditioning everything I got. I had an audition, I got put on hold, and then it went to someone else. So the 13th was my lucky number. I booked, I think that was the Jack in the Box commercial I did. I booked the job. It was one of the most fun jobs. I mean, all my jobs were fun, but it was such a fun job. I got full creative control. They let me really like almost dictate some of what the commercial ended up looking like. There was a whole part written in that because of what I did in the audition room, I got to literally destroy a set. I mean, it was one of the most fun jobs. I got paid really well. And when you book a commercial, what's really nice is you get residual checks, which is what we all would consider passive revenue in our space, meaning you air the commercial once, but you keep opening up your mailbox and getting paid time and time and time again for as long as that commercial runs. Every time they run it, you get a check in the mail. The point of the story, and the reason I'm sharing this here, is imagine if on any of those 12 jobs that I was put on hold and eventually got rejected, if I had decided that didn't mean I sucked. If I had decided that meant what I was doing wasn't working. If I had decided, oh my gosh, I need to go to my acting coach and figure out a whole new way to act because I'm not nailing things and there must be something wrong with my approach. If I had decided my agent sucked and they weren't doing their job and I had fired them. If I had decided, you know what, fuck this and just quit acting altogether. Not only would I have told myself a story and a narrative that literally would not have been true, because when you're put on hold, again, it's because you did everything right and it's between you and someone else, right? It usually has very little to do with, I believe, talent at that point, and so much more to do with who's the right fit. I talk so much about right fit. There's a reason for it. Who's the right fit for the part, for what they're filming. But imagine if those had been the stories I had told myself. Not only would I have made myself feel like shit and maybe quit, and that was pretty early on in my acting career, I would have missed out on one of my favorite jobs and all of that money and booking that job on the 13th try. And I didn't know. It's not like I knew on rejection number 6 that I was going to have 6 more before the 13th, right? I just knew I had to trust the process and keep showing up. And eventually one of those would be mine. And I bring this to you here because I think what happens so often in business is it's between you and someone else, right? Or you get rejected, right, for a sale. And what happens is the brain creates all of these shitty narratives and all of these narratives that slow you down and that hold you back, that either have you literally create problems that didn't exist before in your business. I suck, so I need to go fix something that was never broken because it came down to fit, right, between you and someone else, or it had more to do with what's going on with someone and their personal life and what made the most sense for them in that moment and what they wanted to spend their money on. Usually rejection has like very, very little to do with you. It's something I learned in my acting days that really supports me in business that I try to hand over to my clients, right? So either you'll create this narrative and you'll start fixing things that aren't broken, or what I see can happen a lot too is there will be such a kind of negative down spiral that makes someone feel so crappy that instead of leaning into the next rejection and the next rejection and the next opportunity that eventually brings you to that 13th job that's like all of these amazing things, right? What happens is you lose all of this time and momentum because you've spun yourself into this spiral of doom and gloom that the more you spin yourself down, the more energy you have to work to get yourself back up to neutral. And that, I think, is one of the most detrimental things that can happen in business. And I think that is really, really something for us to all talk about and think about, because once that has happened, once you've had that experience of like you got rejected and took it really personally and you made yourself feel horrible and you like dug yourself into a hole and then you dig yourself out of the hole, what then starts to happen is, and I see this through clients and I coach them around, is no shame of this, like this is human brains doing human brain things. So this isn't to call anyone out, but just to see how this can really be detrimental to business. And then I will talk about how to turn this around and speed this up. But what then starts to happen, and I think we talked about this on the podcast recently, is so much of your mindset and your strategy starts to be around how do I avoid getting rejected instead of how do I book the part, right? So if we use myself as the example again, if every time I've 12 rejections in a row, every time I was put on hold, if I had spun myself out I'd like pull myself out of like the pity party and the doom and gloom and I suck, or like every time I created a problem or something like that. And I was just like, oh, this just feels so horrible. My nervous system is wrecked. If that happened every time, I would start approaching auditions as how do I avoid rejection, as opposed to how do I book this part. And that the reason I kept getting put on hold and the reason I honestly kept getting rejected, that rejection meant that I was really, really close, not that I was really far away. The reason I was able to keep getting put on hold and the reason I eventually booked that 13th job is because every time I showed up for the audition, I was there to book that part. And the Jack in the Box commercial is just a good example for me because I literally remember being in the waiting room and getting the material for that. And I was like, oh, I know exactly how I'm playing this. And I know no one else is going to play it this way. I am booking this fucking part. And I mean, I thought that with everything, but I was like, I am booking this. And I told, this is, again, maybe more information than everyone needs, but I think it's just helpful in terms of the mindset to hear. Because remember, I had just been rejected 12 times in a row. And this was my mindset going into this. It was a commercial. I played like a crazy bride who gets mad at her husband. And I told my partner, I was like, this isn't in the script, but I'm going to lose my shit. And I'm going to run at you. And I'm going to fling myself through the air. And I hope you catch me, because otherwise I'm going to eat shit in the room. And that's basically what we did. And they end up writing that into the part, and that's what booked me the part. But the reason I'm sharing this story with you is it took a certain mindset going into that audition room to even see that opportunity and to have that creative lens and to be willing to go for it in such a way where I told a stranger I'd never met before that I was going to fling myself at them in the air and hope they caught me. God bless my 20-something-year-old self. I don't know if I would do that today. Maybe I would. There's so many metaphors in that story. But that mindset, the only way I could even see that opportunity and approach that audition that way and eventually get that job was because I wasn't coming in trying to avoid getting rejected. I was going in to book that part. I was like, this part is mine, I'm booking it. And if I had still gotten rejected, I would have treated the next audition that way. And I think that's such a difference maker that I see through clients and we talk a lot about, because again, if every time you have rejection, you're like, how do I avoid ever feeling crappy? How do I avoid ever digging myself into that hole? How do I ever feel the sting? Because it's not like it feels fun to be put on hold for 12 things where you're like, oh, again, I just lost this to a 12-year-old, right? It's not like that's ever fun. So of course, there's a part of us that wants to self-protect, whether it's in acting or with booking clients or with selling out your next launch. Of course, there's a part of us that's like that our brains are smart. You have a human brain that says, that hurt, right? Hand touches the stove, that hurts. What do? I'm going to avoid touching the stove at all costs possible, and to do so with as much immediacy as possible because that's painful. So if rejection hurts for you and you're making it mean things that hurt, of course, your brain is going to look for strategies that help you to avoid that pain, which is great if you're trying to avoid getting burned up by the stove. It's great if you're running away from a tiger or a bear. It's unfortunately not what helps you book the client, book the commercial, sell out your launch, right? What actually helps you get the things you want is to start to see, wait a second, I've got to start to have a different relationship with rejection. I've got to start to make rejection mean something else, because as long as this is really painful and as long as I make it mean a bunch of shitty things about me that I don't want to feel, I'm going to be trying to create strategies that help me to avoid that feeling I don't want to feel. And I can create a whole business that is all created as a bubble wrap situation that helps me avoid a feeling, which you will be successful at, but creating a business around a strategy to avoid feeling a certain way, rejection, discomfort, bad about yourself, not good enough, right? You will avoid that feeling, but what it's not going to allow you to do is to run at the very things you want to create. So hopefully that makes sense in terms of that difference, because I think sometimes we hear things like you're creating strategies to avoid a feeling, or you're trying to avoid rejection, and how do you really try to run at getting that part instead. I think we can cognitively understand that, but not necessarily see how that plays out. And so hopefully that acting example and that audition example gives a different lens. I'm just thinking, if I had been really worried about being rejected, I was like, oh my gosh, I can't handle that again. And I don't want to get dropped by my agent, or I think my agent sucks, or I think I suck, or whatever that is. I'm sure I would have gone in and done a on paper good job acting in that commercial audition because I was good at what I did. But there's a very big difference, especially when you're acting, I think in business as well, there's a very big difference between doing a technically good job and running at something because you're gonna fucking give it your all and book it, right? There's a very big difference. If I'd gone in there, I probably just would have done what's on the paper. And I would have been like every other person who auditioned who looked like me. And I would have done a perfectly great job. I wouldn't have like burnt any bridges. I absolutely would not have booked that commercial. I absolutely would still have gotten rejected, right? But it would have been a safer rejection because I probably wouldn't have been on hold for the part or something. I wouldn't have to go through that turmoil of like, oh my gosh, not again. It's like, I don't want to be disappointed, whatever those feelings I would have wanted to avoid. But it would have been a very, very, very different, it would have been a very safe approach. Would have been technically correct. And I think that's what we do in business a lot that we don't realize. We technically do the right things when we want to avoid rejection, all of those feelings, right? We want to avoid the feeling of not just discomfort, but disappointment, I think is a really big one that I talk with clients about that they want to avoid. And so then it's just very easy, again, like how it's essentially playing it safe in an audition where it's like I'm technically doing what I'm supposed to do in my business, but technically doing what you're supposed to do in your business often isn't the magic that gets you what you want. Hopefully that is tracking, because I think that mindset shift alone is one of the biggest game changers in business. I see it in myself. I see it through clients all the time. I have a client who just had a first time launch and who did had an incredible launch. It's like a multi-5-figure first time launch. But one of the things we talked about that she shifted throughout her launch process was exactly this, which is what's the difference between technically doing what your launch strategy says, but there was also, she was showing up in a way where she was kind of trying to avoid feeling a specific way. I think in her case it was a little bit more overwhelmed than disappointment. Versus what does it look like to get fully on board with wanting the result, deciding it is yours, and running at that result, right? Like there's just such a different approach. I think about this even when I create content. There's such a different approach. If I get on this live stream, or if I get on Instagram, or if I record my podcast, if I'm just sort of like, yeah, this is the thing I do in my business to keep my business going. And of course there's seasons, I think, for all of us in that, versus I am recording this podcast to book a client or to really impact someone or to really help someone get a result, right? It's such a different intentionality. So let me circle back. There were some very specific things. I went off on a whole tangent here that I think is hopefully helpful, but there were a couple really specific bullet points I wanted to cover in this conversation today. So one of the, kind of rewinding us back to the beginning here, and one of the things I wanted to talk about is one of the biggest secrets to business success. What does speed up your results? What is behind those 100K launches? What does allow someone to have a 90% sales closing rate? And this is something that every entrepreneur you look up to, every successful actor you look up to, anyone you look up to, this is something they will tell you is true. But I just don't think a lot of people talk about that because it's just not the sexy thing to talk about. But the people you see having those 100K launches or $1 million launches, honestly, they're just willing to get rejected more and faster. And they're just willing to run at rejection and reframe it, which is the strategy I often give to my clients, which I'm going to explain a little bit more. Because look, who doesn't want to not get rejected and just be able to always just have more money and clients flowing through the door, and to always to have a 100K launch and to have a 90% sales rate, closing sales rate. Everybody wants that, but I think what we don't always see is nobody wants what gets you that, right? Everybody wants the 6-pack abs. Nobody really wants to go to the gym and eat well and be disciplined, right? We all just want those shiny results. And I just have enough clients who have gotten results like this, and I have enough peers who have results like this. I have about a 90% closing sales rate. And of course, there's multiple factors that go into that. But I think from the mindset side of things and from the energetic approach side of things, I think one of the biggest difference makers there that I see across the board is just literally being willing to run at rejection and just to get rejected more often and faster. And I think what is also really helpful to know is the bigger your result, the more rejections you're going to have underneath that to get that bigger result. I know no one wants to hear that, but I'm going to explain what I mean here, because I think it's really important to anchor in, because otherwise I think we just set ourselves up for such a challenging game in business. It's we're playing a game where this is the rule set, but we're like forgetting the rules and we're hoping that like the rule set doesn't apply to us. And that's just, I think, just really challenging on anyone. Denise Duffield Thomas, I don't know if anyone knows her. She's the lucky bitch, and she has a money boot camp, she has a money course. And the reason I bring her up is I think she's just been very public with her launch numbers. And I think what's very helpful using her as an example is basically what she said is there's like a statistical norm in terms of what conversion rates are for the size of your email list and your marketing. And of course, you can be kind of on the higher end of it. But generally speaking, as your audience grows, as your list grows, that number it kind of gets usually honestly on the smaller side. Usually when you have a smaller audience, you can that's when you can have those anomalies where it's like you get results that don't make sense because it's easier to have some of that more like one-on-one personal connection. But especially when you have like just hundreds of thousands of people in front of you, you're not going to hop on a one-on-one call with everyone. And I think what's really helpful and what she talks about is it's sort of like no matter how many times she redoes her videos and gets a professional videographer and redoes her landing page and like redoes her sales copy and redoes all of the things, redoes the inside of the program, gets more testimonials, like blows her list up even more, she still tends to have the same conversion rate, right? She's growing her audience all the time. Like her conversion rate, like it might change by like 0.5% or 1%, but we're not talking like it goes from, I don't know, let's just say it's 3 to 5%. It's not like it goes from 3 to 5% to like 50% to the next launch. It's these like little tiny micro amounts, which of course, if you have a very big audience, can be quite a lot of people. But I think what's very normalizing there and to hear there is, let's just say you're even like, she's just like crazy blowing out of the water and she has a 10% conversion rate for her launch with her numbers. I think if you have a smaller audience, I think you could have a much higher conversion rate. But we're talking about someone with like hundreds of thousands of people on their list. That means 90% of people are essentially rejecting her, right? Which tells us literally the path to millions and millions of dollars means being willing to be rejected 90% of the time to get the 10% that gives you the results you want. But our brains think the path to success is getting the 90% of people to say yes and to like us and to get 100% of the time we hear a yes and never get rejected, and that's the path to success. And again, I think that's just what keeps so many people stuck or slows down momentum or really keeps people from getting the results they could in their business, because then it's all about how do I make sure I'm either perfect and never have a no, and as soon as I have a no, that means there's something wrong, I need to fix it, or it means we're focused on how do I avoid rejection instead of seeing, no, wait a second. Rejection is literally the thing that gets me success. The more I get rejected, literally that means the more I'm going to get success. That's how the numbers or get yeses. There's a great quote by Steve Chandler, yes lives in the land of no. I think that means more than one thing that we'll talk about in a moment, but I think part of it is literally what we're seeing here. The way you have the 100K launch, the way you have the booked out business, the way you have the reoccurring 10K, 20K, 100K months is starting to create a new relationship with rejection and starting to see it as like, wait a second, this is something to embrace. When I get 12 no's in commercials, that means the 13th one, one of these has to be mine soon. And the quicker I can accept that, the quicker I can move on and show up for the next audition to get that yes. And the same in business, the less you can make rejection mean, the quicker you can be like, cool, that just gets me closer to a yes, the quicker you can run at booking that next client. So hopefully that part makes sense. If you have questions, let me know. But I think it's really, really important to know that literally the people you're looking at who are making $1 million a month, they're making $1 million a month because this isn't like even a mindset where it's like they're willing to be rejected more, but they're not getting rejected more. Because of the numbers required for that kind of money, percentage-wise, they are absolutely being rejected. I mean, depending on what we consider rejected, but they're getting no from the majority of their audience to be able to get yes for the numbers they need. And what I think is really helpful for most of you to also take a look at is how many people do you really need to say yes to you to get the results you want? I mean, it would have been great if I'd booked all 12 of those commercials. I would have been a very happy camper. But honestly, booking one in that short span of time was awesome. And I was already booking quite a bit at that time and paid me really well. I don't even know if I could have shot all 12 of them given the shoot dates. And if you're a one-on-one coach, right, how many clients can you really hold? If you're selling a group program, how many spots do you really have, right? Most of you have a cap on the capacity you can have. And so if you're taking a look at your audience, even if you have a smaller audience, starting to notice, like, really, ideally, most people are going to be saying no to you, so that the few people who are right for you can say yes. And the more you can get that mindset on board, the more you can start to, and this is what I coach my clients around, you can start to run at and reframe rejection. Because if you can take the mindset of, I'm going to run at rejection, because I'm also going to run at booking that client, and the way I book that next client, the way I fill out this group program, the way I sell out my mastermind is by running at rejection, because that also means I'm going to start to be really specific and really go after the people I know I can serve, which by default means everyone else is going to start to say no. And that is the way that I win this game. If we go back to the commercial that I booked, I didn't know that was the right. I literally made up something that wasn't in the audition material. They should have given me copywriting credit on that. But I'm being very silly there. But that wasn't written there. I was both running at rejection and running at booking at the part. I had the mindset that this is mine, so I'm going for it, and I am playing full out, because I'm either going to play full out and lose this because I played full out and gave it my all, or I'm going to get rejected because that's not what they want. It's not the right fit. But I'm definitely not going to get rejected because I failed by default, because I just did the safe thing that was on paper. And that's kind of what we were talking about when we're saying running at rejection and running at and reframing rejection. And so a couple pieces in here, because I think otherwise it's like, wait, you just want me to run at getting no's? And in some ways there is part of this is there is a numbers. There's both not a numbers game to business and there is a numbers game to business. And meaning in that, especially with a smaller business, I really believe you get to have results that don't make sense. Many of my clients have results when like this does statistically and like whatever the norm is does not make sense. And there is a numbers game in that quite literally, if like you need to have a certain number of people in front of you to be able to bring in the numbers you want. That's why we market, that's why we build audiences, right? That's why we talk to people, that's why we do the things that we do in business on the marketing and sales side of things. And one of I think this is probably originally from Rich Lichtman, maybe many people coach around this. One of the things I'll challenge my clients, I'll say, I want you to go run at getting rejected and getting no's, and I want you to try to get 10 no's as quickly as possible, and not from like a frenetic hurry up hustle mentality, but from the mindset we're taking here. And that one, I want you to see that when you're running at rejection, you're also running at booking a client. So like, because then you're actually going after what you want, but you're also taking the pressure off when you frame it as I'm running after that no. Because otherwise, if you're just running after a yes, if you're just trying to get yeses and just trying to book your next client, let's be honest, what do we all do? Really, we perfect, we try to figure out the right thing to say in our post and in our content and in our follow-up and in our personal reach outs, right? Like there's such it's the playing it safe with the audition material. There's such a, how do I book a client instead of how do I go after as many no's as possible, right? It takes some of that pressure off where it's like, I just know I'm going to get some no's. And I know what Steve Chandler says is yes lives in the land of no's. The more no's I collect, the closer I am to my next yes. But also, the more no's I collect, the quicker I get data. The quicker I start to see what isn't working. The quicker I start to get information that's really useful for me. The quicker I get market research. The quicker I start to build relationships with people who turn into clients later, which is a whole nother conversation about clients now, clients later. But I'm such a big believer on that philosophy in terms of the customer journey. I talk about this all the time. I call it clients now, clients later. And people you meet today might be a no today, but yes lives in the land of no, meaning they might very well turn into a client 3 months, 6 months, 2 years down the road. And I think sometimes we can be so short-sighted in business and miss out on clients later because we're just so needing that yes in the moment. So I think that's another benefit of running at rejection. And it really starts to change up the approach you have in business. But to run at rejection, right, I think one of the things that is really required, and this is what I talk with clients about, that I invite you to think about, is how can you reframe rejection? Because if you're making rejection currently mean, I suck, I'm not good enough, people don't like me, my business isn't working, I'm not gonna be able to pay rent, I don't have enough money, right? If all of that is what comes up around rejection, it's going to be both very tough to run at rejection, because your brain is going to try to do everything in its power to avoid all of those negative thoughts and emotions. But it's also going to feel really crappy every time it happens, which then it's kind of like this weird goal where you're like, I don't really want that goal, so I'm trying to avoid that goal, but Kim said to run at that, right? Like we just get this very stop-start energy, and then every time it happens, you dig into a hole, and then like you have to like dig yourself out. So I think like the first step here is starting to look at what are you even making rejection mean in your business. And maybe this needs to be a question on the podcast, but I would really sit with and think, what do I make rejection mean when someone says no, when someone doesn't buy, when someone doesn't like my post, when someone doesn't sign up for my email list, when whatever areas you think are rejection, when you hear no, what do you immediately make that mean? And I know we've been talking about this now for 30 minutes. And I want to read this comment here in a second from Laura, but I know I framed some things that I think people can make this mean, but I really invite you to sit down and think about what do you make rejection mean, and maybe journal around that and get honest with that, because that's going to be the most important piece here for you to take a look at and to reframe. And I would really look at that and be like, isn't that interesting? And like, is this even true? And then I would really decide ahead of time, what are you deciding rejection means for you in your business? I think the reason I have an easier time in business with rejection is because I literally got schooled in the art of rejection acting. And I would have been miserable for 10 years had I not built a different meaning and relationship around rejection. I really had to learn how to reframe it and see it as something different. And I had to train my brain to see rejection as a vehicle to getting everything I want. But if I hadn't done that consciously, right, I think it would have been something where it's like, well, how do I just play safe? Or let me just quit this, or this is impossible. Let me see what Laura says here. Laura says, yes, totally making sense. Love the running at it part of the story. Flinging yourself into the air. And it's much more fun thinking about it this way. Thank you. Oh, I'm so glad. So glad. Yeah, I mean, literally my commercial example is literally running and flinging myself through the air at rejection and hoping someone would catch me. Kit, do not try this at home. Luckily I did get caught. But I think it is such a more fun way to think about it. And I think there's something, I was talking about this with a client recently. We were talking about how seriously we can take business. And of course, I take my business very seriously. I take my clients very seriously. I take this very seriously in that I care quite a bit. I hold this to a high standard. We were literally talking about that on the podcast this week. I take my work very seriously. And I think sometimes we can take it so seriously that we put so much pressure, and everything is black and white, life or death, right? Every potential client, I think there's so much weight and so much pressure. And I think there's something to looking at all of this as a game. I mean, in some ways, not to diminish the importance of life or anything like that, but in some of this, it's like, how can we frame all of life as a game? But definitely business and making money. I think the more we can start to hold it, take it seriously, but hold it more lightly and see it as a game. And a game where it's like, are you playing to win this game, or are you just trying to get through your turns and not get like kicked out of the game or not lose the game? Two totally different ways to approach the game of business and the game of money. And so I think part of it is also, I think we have to look at things like, right, so the way to win the game of business means I gotta not every time I get rejected. It's like I'm thinking, what is it? Is Candyland the one where it's like you go backwards and you like go down the slip and slides? I don't know. Old school kids board game. But there's certain games where it's like you play to a certain thing and then like you get to a spot really far and it just like Chutes and Ladders maybe. You like have to like shoot all the way down. When you're avoiding rejection and you're avoiding in business, right? That is like the Chutes and Ladders game where it's like, yeah, you might get to a certain place because you're moving piece by piece, but it's like you're going to end up going right down that chute and go backwards, and you're gonna have to like get yourself all the way back up that again, versus like, how do you look for the ladders, the shortcuts, which is like just being willing to run at these things a little bit more. But the only way we can do that, it's so great for me to say that, and that doesn't mean shit for anyone unless we start to reframe what we make rejection means. I think that is the biggest part. I think there's like always the strategy side of things, but the mindset underneath that all of us are human, and if what we're running at feels dangerous, feels like a threat, feels like it's going to be painful, feels like it's going to hurt us, feels like something we should avoid, it doesn't matter how much we're talking about this as a concept. Your nervous system and your subconscious is going to do everything it can to avoid that. So for everyone, I really invite you to get curious about what you currently make rejection mean and how can you reframe that? What can you make it mean instead? And remembering, I mean, this is like mindset 101, but I think sometimes it's just helpful to hear these things. Everything in our life feels a certain way simply because of the meaning and kind of the rules and the structure we've given to it. And that's all just in many ways, it's all just made up. So you might as well make up the shit that lets you feel good and get what you want, that allows you to win at the game of business and making money. So we could argue rejection means 400 different things. You might as well choose what actually serves you. And what I've seen serve entrepreneurs that are making literally 100K a month or $1 million a month, what I've seen serve people I know in the acting world who have blown up their acting career is deciding that rejection is a positive thing, that it is just one step closer to yes, that it means you're in the arena, that it means it was between you and someone else, that it means you now have a fuck ton of data that you can look at, that it means, right, like what are all the positives you can make that mean? And again, all of the things you decide to make it mean are correct, so you might as well choose the thing that serves you the most. Because what I know for sure is if you run at rejection, you will speed up success. This was the other piece with that I was going to say. I think what is helpful to hear too, I put in the like subheading here, that this helps you have a 90% closing sales rate. And I think there's got to be someone's brain now on the replay that's like, so I get the whole run at rejection thing. I get how like literally the more rejection, right, the more I'm putting myself out there, the quicker I'm going to get to that next yes. It's sort of like dating, right? You only need one, but the way you get to that one is like the more you go on some dates and go through the wrong ones, the quicker you find your right one. I think that part can make sense, but I think the part where it's like, how does that lead to a 90% closing or sales rate, closing rate? And I think that part can be a little confusing. So, because I think again, like it kind of, this makes sense for the like getting a yes, but not how does this lead to 90% closing rate with sales calls, or how does this lead to a 100K launch? So I think there's a couple of things here that are worth speaking to when you take the approach of I'm going to run at and reframe rejection, and really playing with both of those. So first, I think remembering literally what I was just saying with this commercial audition, when you're running at rejection, that doesn't mean you're going to be rejected. And I think those are two very different things. Now, of course, that means you're willing to be rejected. I had to be willing to be rejected 12 times, but honestly, that also meant all of those 12 times they could have chosen me instead. I was very close to that. So that does not, just because you run at rejection doesn't mean you're going to be rejected. But what we were talking about earlier with the commercial example, the approach of running at rejection is a different approach than avoiding rejection. And I think that's what gets you the 100K launch. 100K launches usually don't happen the first launch. They usually happen on the third or the fifth launch or the 10th launch, right? Big launch numbers are built by having a first launch and growing over time. And what you do each time is you build up your audience, you build up your social proof, you build up your testimonials, you build up your data, you refine, right? You get all of this information. So I think some of this is also seeing that through this, you're collecting information, you're seeing like how can you build up that kind of snowball that builds momentum as it goes. And the only way to do that is to be willing to run at the rejection that isn't the 100K launch that gets you to the 100K launch. But I think it's also seeing that like with a sales call, for example, if I'm trying to avoid being rejected, I'm going to have a very different conversation with a potential client. I am probably not going to show up in my power, right? I'm going to have a very, very, very different type of sales conversation. I'm going to navigate objections differently. I'm going to maybe not speak my truth in the same way to what I'm seeing for them. Just like that audition for the Jack in the Box commercial, if I had been trying not to get rejected, I would have just shown up very differently. So I also believe that aside from, yes, you're going to collect data, like literally the more you run at rejection, doesn't mean you're necessarily going to get rejected, but even if you were along the way, the more you're refining, the more you're getting better, the more you're practicing, the more you're building your audience, the more you're showing up and teaching your audience what to know about you and your programs and your offer, and all of that snowballs to get those big results. And also the approach, the way you are in your power of not avoiding and running at, is going to do things like help you to have a 90% closing sales rate. I've talked about this maybe here, maybe it's in the sales course, but I think one of the reason I think there are lots of reasons I have a 90% or more closing rate on my sales call. I think transparently part of the reason is simply most of the time by the time someone books a call with me, they've been hanging out in my world for a long time and they usually already have a relationship built with me and have a pretty good idea I'm the person they want to work with. I think if I had way more spots open all the time and was just having regular calls and I was bringing in colder leads, I honestly think I would have a lower closing sales rate because I think that's just part of sales and I just want to normalize that part of it. But I also think that I show up in my power for my clients, whether that's on a sales conversation or not. And I think this is the part I was going to share. I think this is in the sales course, but I have a mentality of I don't know shit, meaning I don't know what the person in front of me is telling me, but also I'm not here to book a client. I'm not here to get them to say yes. Like I'm literally not trying to get a yes on a sales call. I'm trying to discern, is this the right fit? And I'm so willing to be rejected if not. And I think that approach does actually make it easier for someone to feel safe to say yes, because we're having a very different conversation than if I was trying to get a client, or if I felt really desperate and really needed someone, or if I was trying to figure out the right things to say to someone, or if I was like, I'm going into this call because I've done a bunch of research and I already know what this person needs, or if I was like, how do I avoid getting rejected on this call and say all the things right as opposed to what I actually think, or, that might not in air quotes technically be right, but is right for this conversation. So there's both with this concept, I think there's both the element of when you run at and reframe rejection, literally you're giving yourself enough touch points, enough opportunities, you're building the momentum, you're putting yourself out there, you're getting the data, you're getting the information, you can refine things, you're giving yourself enough chances to build the momentum that gets you the 100K launch. And I think the other reason this supports you is it changes the approach and the way you actually show up. And I think both of those are important to speak to, because I think otherwise this, I think, can be a very confusing concept where it's like, I kind of get what you're saying, but also like, why the fuck would I do that, Kim? And then I'm going to keep saying, just because you're running at rejection does not mean you're going to be rejected. I think the more you run at the more you're willing to run at, like sincerely run at being rejected, and the more you're willing to be rejected, the less you'll actually be rejected. Laura says, LOL, yes to making stuff up. I forgot which part that was about, because I just realized 5 minutes ago. What was I saying? I make all sorts of things up. We know that, though. So just because you're running at rejection does not mean you're going to be rejected. The more you're willing to run at rejection and reframe that, I bet you the less you actually get rejected. And on the flip side of this, I want to be so mindful of how I say that, because otherwise we start to get into this funky thing where like, cool, so I'm going to run at rejection, because the more I run at rejection, the less I'm going to get rejected. So I'm actually trying to avoid being rejected. And I really want to invite you to notice where are all the places your brain is being sneaky and having you try to avoid things in your business. The way you win at business, the way you win at money is by taking the running at what you want approach. I want to run at making money. I want to run at booking this audition. I want to run at booking this client, not what is the way I can avoid not feeling a certain way, not have something bad happen, not get disappointed. So just notice where that part can be sneaky, because on the flip side of this, the annoying truth is the more success you're going to hold, the more money you're going to hold, the more clients you're going to hold, the more rejection is going to be in your pathway, right? It's sort of like the bigger the whoever we're looking at who's won the last Oscar, right? I guarantee if you look back behind them in their history, they probably have more rejections than someone who's only booked a handful of TV parts. And that is not a weird, like, oh, this is a great story that they get to now say on stage. They've just had so many rejections and like they finally made it. It's signal that's because that's how that works. They had to put themselves in the arena that many more times. That's part of how they honed their craft, got the opportunities, got in the room, right? They had to put themselves in the room enough, which means being willing to get rejected and actually getting rejected enough to end up landing some of those parts, because there is an element of when you run at rejection, you also start to create opportunities and luck for yourself. Because again, it is a numbers game and it's not a numbers game. But if you go and run at 100 people and you're willing to get rejected by 100 people, like just by sheer math, you're going to create some magic, right? Like some of those people, even if you weren't great at what you did, right? Some of those people are going to be a fit. Like there's no way you don't improve through that process. But this is also where we start to see people are like, man, they're so lucky. That person always has the best luck. Or man, I can't believe that opportunity has landed in their lap. And it's like, absolutely, luck is part of, I think luck is a part of good luck and bad luck, right? Like we all have good luck and bad luck. And I think some of that is just the cosmos, the world out of our hands. I don't even think it's like negative, positive thinking. I think that is just we live in a 3D reality, and that is also just a part of life and running a business. So yes, of course. And I would bet money on some of the people who seem like they're the luckiest and have like these opportunities where you're like, how did that happen? I bet part of the reason that happened is they were just willing to run at so many doors that got slammed in their face and just kept running at another one. And that sheer like willingness creates luck and opportunities that they just wouldn't have been privy to otherwise. Hopefully that makes sense. Laura says, Ari, making stuff up. You were talking about the mindset of what we make rejection mean. Oh, yes. Oh, thank you. I read it because I was also talking about acting and making stuff up on the script that wasn't there. So I was like, maybe we were talking about that. But yes, that makes more sense to the LOL to making stuff up. Yes, and we get to, I think what you're saying is we get to decide what rejection means, and it's kind of all made up. I mean, really, all of our mindset is made up. I think that's the part you're speaking to. So that makes more sense. Thank you for clarifying that. Or was I just? Oh yes. So that was that last piece there. I think that can just be the kind of fun place to play with this, and I think this is a way too just to reframe rejection. What if we all started to see rejection as like, oh, the more I'm willing to run at rejection, the more magic I'm creating. The more, if you believe in universe energy, right? The more I'm collaborating with the universe and saying like, well, what are you going to put behind door number 13? Because like, I can't wait to see that. The more you're literally putting yourself in the path of magic, of luck, of an opportunity that might not have been there before. I will use this as my I think there's not too many. There's one other piece I want to share here, but I'm going to share one quick story. Most of you know this already, but my husband and I are about to have our second wedding anniversary. We've been together 9 years, so I met him my first year in New York, but I was single for about 5 years before I met him. And I met him on Tinder, and in many ways, the reason I was able to meet him and what felt like the most like magical first date where like time stood still. We had a like 6-hour first date where we like stared into each other's eyes for like hours and literally were weirdos. And I mean, weirdos in the best way possible. And you'd be like, oh, you're so lucky that happened. It's like, totally unlucky. Like I have a unicorn of a man in the other room, and I am the luckiest human ever. And I also think I helped create some of that luck because I was just so willing to get rejected and to go on so many dates and swipe right on so many people and meet with so many people who really were not the right fit or really were like I was just willing to put myself out there. And we had met on Tinder about 6 months before. I honestly don't know if we would have met if I hadn't been, I didn't even want to meet someone on the dating apps. And this is not to say everybody has to like go on a bunch of dates or go reach out to a gazillion people. This is not about a burnout or anything like that, or doing things that don't feel safe to you, I should say. Please do things that don't feel comfortable to you all the time. That's how you grow and stretch. But I think in many ways, right, I created this beautiful luck that is also luck, and I do not take that for granted, and I'm very blessed and privileged in like all of the ways. And also, like, I think it could have been so easy for those 5 years to be like, oh, I suck at dating, no one likes me, I should just give up, I'm just going to be single forever, I'm going to be a spinster. And I'm sure I had those moments. I'm sure if you talk to some of my best friends, I had those moments. But right, I had to be willing to like keep getting back up and be like, no, I'm going to go run at rejection again. I'm going to go run at another bad date. I have a fair share of bad dates between LA and New York, right? But that was also how the luck was created. And so I think that's just a helpful maybe way to see it in business. I think sometimes we just see the shiny results online. We hear someone talk about, hey, I have a multi-6-figure booked out business. Hey, I have a husband who's a unicorn. Hey, I have this dream apartment in New York City. Like, right? It's so easy to hear all of that and then to just think, oh, well, they just got really lucky and I am lucky. Like, I will, yes, like I'm not going to discount that. And whether it's me or someone else, I think remembering like they also probably just got rejected a whole bunch along the way. It's just, it doesn't really serve my marketing or to even serve my clients or to serve uplifting people to always be talking about like, here are all the times I got rejected dating. Here are all the times I got rejected my first 3 years in business. It serves a conversation like this, but we're just not going to talk about that all the time. So I think just remembering that for yourself can be helpful so you're not making yourself wrong. The last piece, Laura says, love this, lucky and also completely on purpose and intentional. Yes. Blessed, lucky, privileged. Do not take any of that for granted, and also very much intentional, very much on purpose, very much, not an accident. I think it's so I always refer back to Mike Dooley's triangle exercise. Laura, do you know that? You draw a triangle, you put the goal you want at the top, and you draw a line to the middle. Down the middle on the left-hand side, you write all of the things you're responsible for showing up for. And on the right-hand side, sort of everything you're surrendering to the universe. And I think that's kind of what we're talking about even with rejection, is if your goal is a 100K launch, if your goal is a 6-figure year, if your goal is consistent 10K months, right? There's all the stuff on the left-hand side that as business owners, we're responsible for showing up for. And then there's all of the stuff to surrender over to universe, God, higher power, your higher self, whatever it is you believe in. And I think running at rejection is one of the things on our left-hand side, right? How much are you willing to put yourself in the arena and to do so plain full out? Not, I'm just checking this off the checklist. I'm not just going to the audition and reading what's on the page and being like, see, I gave it my all. Why the fuck isn't this working for me? But like, I'm gonna go in and run at this full speed ahead after what I want, be willing to get rejected. And then what's on the other side, right? Then it's up to universe to meet you halfway. And it's like, oh, cool. Well, the more you're running at this, the easier it is for me to put things in your path. Here's some luck. Here's a cool client. Here's like, those results don't make sense. Here's $100 that you just found on the ground. Here's your husband. I don't know, whatever. I'm like rolling the dice like it's giving things, right? But it's just like, I feel like the more we're doing that, the more we're also literally giving whatever higher power you believe in the opportunity to just put things in your path. Laura says, oh no, I didn't know this model at all over. Thank you. Oh, I'll grab you mean the Mike Dooley exercise? I have the link because I sometimes share it with clients. I'll drop it in the comments for everyone because it goes to his website and it just describes it really beautifully. I'll make a note to myself to actually make a note here because I will forget. And I will put that in the comments afterwards. All right, there was one last thing with this conversation, otherwise I'm going to go down a whole luck tangent that I wanted to close with because I think this was one of the bullets I promised I would talk about. So the last piece here that I had put in one of the bullets for the conversation is why only hearing hell yes isn't always as positive as it seems and the hidden challenges that come when you never hear no. So just a couple quick thoughts on this because I think this might be helpful with reframing rejection as well and help you to run at it and help you to run at what you want. I think not only do most people need far fewer yeses than they think, right? If we use a dating example, you need one yes. If you're in an open relationship, you need a couple of yeses. You still need far fewer yeses than you think. If you're in a one-on-one business, right, how many yeses do you actually need? If you're running a group program. So I think there's just understanding that part. But there's a couple other pieces here that come up. If you're always hearing yes and you're never hearing rejection or you're never hearing a no, the thought that comes up for me, if I was coaching you, it's like, yeah, that feels really great. But I start to wonder, are you charging enough? I start to wonder, are you putting yourself out there enough? I start to wonder, are you stretching enough? I start to wonder, are you putting anything out there that, like what's going on that we're never hearing no? And of course, like, I have a 90% sales closing rate or whatever that is. Like, that's great. Like, of course, that's ideal. We like want to have things refined where it's like we're getting yeses most of the time and like we're bringing in right fit leads and all of that. But if you're never ever hearing no, and maybe it's not in your sales calls, but maybe it's with something new you're putting out there, I do start, like, I would just even wonder, are you really clear on who's the right fit for you? I mean, I don't know that I would necessarily call that a rejection, but if not part of, like, I don't know if I would even consider that offering someone something, but I know that if someone comes onto my call, I don't want to just yes everyone as a potential client. Certain people are amazing humans, but they're not the right fit for my work. And so I think there's this way where it's like just even starting to notice that I think our brains just think, oh, it would just feel so soothing and so great to be that person who always gets yes, who booked all 12 of those commercials, who has 100% closing rate. And look, I'm all for getting as close to that as possible as long as it's not putting pressure on you. But I think just also noticing that isn't sometimes we put these things on a pedestal, and that doesn't always give you what you think it will. I would wonder, do you have enough boundaries in place? Like, I think just sometimes noticing that if we have an absolute like that, that might not be as beneficial as your brain makes it out to be. It might be more you're playing small, you're playing it safe, you're not stretching, right? You're really comfortable. And is that really what you want? If you're hearing some more no's, sure, sometimes we need to take a look at, again, what is the data telling us? If we're hearing 90% no, and it doesn't make sense, and it's not like, you're on hold for a commercial or it's you and someone else, but it's like you're never getting the call back, or we use the audition example. Sure, like that's helpful information. Bring it to your coach. I think we want to look at, is something going on with marketing? Is something going on with messaging? Like, is there something we need to change with our sales approach? Are we not bringing in the right people? But again, I think that's a positive, because the quicker you collect those no's, the quicker you get that data and information. If you don't have enough data, you don't have enough information to know what to change. But if it's on the flip side, again, I would just, as your coach, I would be curious either way there, and at a certain point would just wonder if there's something we need to take a look at. The other thing, we talked about this in a podcast episode, I think maybe a month or two ago. I personally am also, this is like a side tangent conversation, but it just comes up with this. I'm always wanting to be a little suspect of a hell yes. And I mean, I'm all for a hell yes when someone's really decided. But I think that sometimes we can push so much to get a hell yes that we bypass or omit some of the red flags as service providers we want to take a look at, that actually are what allow for holding on to clients and not having clients ghost you or ask for a refund payment. And I think sometimes when we're pushing really hard for a hell yes, as opposed to sort of like running a rejection, the way we're talking about rejection, like not necessarily pushing for a no, but just being more open to see what's actually going on there. I think sometimes we can sell in a way that is not misleading, because I don't think anyone in this group sells in a way that's misleading. I think this is actually a very, very in integrity group, but I think sometimes we can sell in a way that has either our own, like we bypass our own internal red flags, or we kind of gloss over and like put sprinkle dust over what someone else's red flags are. If that's the goal, right, is to get all hell yeses, where that can show up later in the container, or when someone ghosts you, or when someone's asking for a refund, or what they got isn't exactly what they expected, because there's such a push just to get that hell yes, instead of, and this is almost going to a whole nother conversation, but instead of, I always think about, how do we get the right yeses? How do we get the right clients? How do we really test for the yeses, Rich Lichtman says? How do we really see what's actually going on with someone? What's the right solution and fit for them, as opposed to trying to push for a yes or a no? And I think it just takes us out of that neutrality that's really important for us as CEOs to support and facilitate those conversations. So again, I'm not saying if you run at rejection or run at reframe rejection that you're going to get rejected. You can absolutely have that as the vehicle. The whole idea is it's the vehicle to the 10K, the 20K, the 100K months, and to make those reoccurringly, to have the big launches, right? This is the vehicle to that. But also, I think just to help with that mindset, and as you reframe it, to see that just trying to run at yeses all of the time, that can actually be just as detrimental as if you were trying to get a no, which I know no one is trying to do here. And I think the whole kind of thing we're playing with here is, how can you be a little less concerned about the yes or the no, and really run at what you want, doing it the way you want to, full steam ahead, and sort of let go of that outcome that really isn't up to you anyway. And I think that's maybe a way to play with, I mean, we're getting a little manifesty here, but I think that's really a way to play in your business and in your life for what you want. All right, I hope this was beneficial for y'all. Just seeing if I have any other, I think those are the main pieces I wanted to speak to. But the big piece here is really just remembering that everyone who has success, they have success because they've gotten rejected a lot, right? Like, you don't get to what you want without rejection. But if exactly what Laura and I were talking about here, what if we look at rejection, and what if you decide to make it mean something very different? How can you make rejection mean something that really supports you and serves you? And it doesn't have to feel like rainbows and unicorns, but how can you have it feel neutral? And if anything else, and how can you play with that mentality of, I'm going to run at that, I'm going to run at what I want, instead of try to avoid feelings that I don't like? That, I promise you, that does so much for business success, when I look at anyone who is making a lot of money and holding a lot of money and holding a lot of clients and holding a lot of success, they're running after what they want instead of trying to avoid what they don't want. So I hope that's beneficial to y'all. If you're listening to this and you're like, great, Kim, I love this concept, but also the thought of running at rejection makes me want to poke my eyes out, then maybe you shouldn't book a call with me because you probably will hate working with me. But if you're listening to this, you're like, okay, I hear you, but I think I could use some support because there's a lot of crunchiness coming up around this. And I'm a human and I have a brain, and it's just like it hears the words coming out of your mouth, but I've got all sorts of feels around this, or I just practically don't even know how I would go about running out rejection. Like I get the concept, but like what do I even do in my business? How do I go run after that rejection in my business? How do I go about booking clients? How do I go about filling out my next program? How do I launch this? How do I even talk about my work in a way that people could potentially reject? And to be very clear, we're talking about rejection to get you what you want, whether that is the 10K or the 100K month or year. If you're hearing that and that's what's coming up for you, I would love to connect with you. I am opening up some free coaching calls, my 100K CEO mindset and strategy sessions, as a way really to put my money where my mouth is, but also for you to see if it's a fit for us to work together so that we can take a look at your business, do a bit of a mini audit and get clear on the clarity, mindset, strategy, and action, and identify the right gap to close so that you can really see what is the way for you to run at bringing those right fit leads that turn into right fit clients for those reoccurring revenue months. So I will drop a link for that. They are limited because I overbooked myself a little bit of those in the past, but they are absolutely available. We definitely still have some available, and I do have some intent. We are opening up an intensive this month, and then I have some spots opening up in the fall as well for one-on-one and intensives. I had to think there for a second, but I will drop that link. There's no obligation to work with me. If you book that call, I would love to support you anyway, but absolutely, if you're interested in how I work with clients and whether that is an intensive or ongoing spot, we can chat about that at the end as well. So I will drop a link for that. Please take me up on that. I love getting to do them, and I love getting to meet y'all. And then I will be back next week. Got another topic for us, and I think it's next week. I'm announcing, I'm like champing at the bit. I always get that phrase wrong. For our next masterclass this month, so I'm announcing it next week, and I cannot wait to announce it and invite you all into that. So I'll see you next week. I'll share that all with you. Thank you for hanging with me. I love y'all. Love you, Laura. Bye.